I have a project set up. This is a test project, and I've seen several questions lately about Baptist fan, and I always use this Baptist fan by Laurie. And if I go over here and look at what I have on the screen, I have this middle row of the one that came with the Statler, but I don't use that anymore. I use the one here, one of Laurie Thomas's, and go down here. This pattern is copyright by Laurie Thomas, 2011, and I like this because of this extra little piece there, and here it connects very well. So I've quilted these two rows. Now I'm going to roll my quilt, and I'll show you how I get everything lined up. You notice that I have extra repeats on the screen. There's one on the left and one on the right. I do that because I don't want to have any space on the edge of the quilt that would be unquilted. So I'll show you how I go about quilting and rolling and making sure everything is lined up again. I've deleted my old boundary and I've rolled the quilt. You can see it says the needle is way up here, but really it's right at this point right there, and this point is up towards the take-up roller. So I'll do a relocate. Now notice I'm using the point in the center of this quilt. So I will just scroll in, go to right click, get my menu so I can relocate, shift all to one point, and I will click on this point right here. I don't know if there's an end there. No. So I'll turn off the end snap. I'm going to click on that point, get my zoomed in, then click yes. Now I've shifted everything on the screen around this point right here. So we'll see exactly how everything goes. I'm going to do a new boundary and finish my setup. I like to check this point right there on the right side of the quilt and on the left side of the quilt to make sure this is lined up exactly how it's supposed to be. So what I will do is just select everything and use my arrow, this wedge, and I'm going to move the patterns just slightly. Because I want that point right where the needle is located. That looks good. And I'll check the left side also to make sure I stay lined up. I do this as I go down the side, down the quilt. As I quilt and roll, I go down the side of the quilt and I check this point because I want it to stay lined up. So then I'll check the left side, see how that looks, and it's just a little bit off, so I will use my wedge on the left side and make sure that that's as lined up as perfect as I can get it. That looks good. Now, when I first started working with this Baptist fan or any other pattern that I needed to get rid of a piece on the sides, I would select the entire row and I would do the fill inside. Well, I do not do that any longer. And also, when I first started, if I could quilt 2 rows like I can here, I would select both rows and I would do a fill inside. I'm going to go ahead and do this and show you exactly what you're going to encounter. And I'm using version 6, so I have these icons on the side, and here's my fill inside icon. Now if I go and do a fill inside, and I'll do this, but then I can undo it when I get ready to. Okay, here I did my fill inside, and okay, I'm going to do a virtual stitch out. Now remember, I drew a boundary and I did a fill inside by selecting these 2 rows. And I guarantee you, when it gets to the end of this first row, it's going to stitch a line over to the beginning of the next row. Now it depends on the pattern, how everything is set up, as to what direction this stitching line will be. I'll do a virtual stitch out. Just press F2. I have this speeded up so you can see. Now when it gets over to the right hand side, it's going to take off. Okay, see, it went right down along the bottom edge of that boundary and stitched right across to the beginning of the next row. Okay, so it will continue to do that kind of operation every time you have more than 1 row and you try to do a multiple row fill inside. It's going to stitch from the right side to the left side, depending on the pattern and where the pattern ends. Sometimes it will stitch a diagonal line. If the pattern ended up here, it would stitch a diagonal line down like this to the beginning of the next row if the start and end were like at the top of the pattern. So this is something to avoid, because you do not want this line stitched across. I'm going to undo everything because I can't stitch this the way it is. Okay, I'm back to having my pattern deleted on the sides, and I'll show you how I do my fill. So right here, I need a little bit of this pattern. I'll right click on it, I'll do a fill inside, and this one, right click, do a fill inside. Now I can go ahead and do the second row on the left side. It won't do any cause any problems. Right click. This time I'm going to use the fill inside here, right there. Again, I'll right click, fill inside. Okay, do the same thing on the right hand side. Just grab that, use my icon. Okay, because I've used this way of doing this, I will not have this stitch around. You can see my border is still red here across this line. The only place the border is black is where it's going to stitch from one point to the next point, I'll do my stitch out again. Okay, it's going to go over, and anywhere there is, see, it's going to, see, it's working the way I want it to. It will actually tie off over here on the right hand side, and then I'll press OK to go to the next point. So I'll escape out of that. Now I'm going to stitch these 2 rows, and these 2 rows have been quilted. I'll just quilt, and I'll just roll the quilt again and set up. I want to show you that right here in this 3rd row, this was the 1st row of the 2nd setup. You see when it got to the end of this right there, it actually tied off and then went up and finished this part up here. I think I can set it so that it does not do that. Okay, I have rolled the quilt, did my relocate, have my boundary drawn. I'm going to do this a little different. Select this repeat and this one, and do the fill inside. Then try this on the left side, the 2 repeats, again fill inside. Right side, I've selected them. Select this repeat first, then this repeat. Do my fill. Bottom row, do the same thing. Okay, I'm going to look here and see if I was wanting it to connect this point to that point, but it is not going to do that. So I'm going to delete my boundary, and we'll look at the stitching lines. Now this one, it did that. It connected it, but on this one it did not. It connected this, but it did not connect here, and that's fine. It doesn't do that alone. But what it did do is, before I had this space where it tied off, and then it tied off right there and then went up. On this one it did not do that, and on these 2 it did not do that. So it connected this point all the way up, so I don't have a blank space in there. I've set up a different pattern just to show you what can happen if you're using fill and you're not paying attention to exactly what you're doing. I just left this hanging off the edge so I could do a fill and show you. I have the boundary around these 2 rows. Now if I select the 2 rows and I do a fill inside, we'll see what happens. Okay, you see this line right here? It put the line in from the right side of the 1st row to the left side to the beginning of the 2nd row. If I do a virtual, here's what will happen. You just stitched a line right across your quilt from the end of the 1st row to the beginning of the 2nd row. And that is exactly what will happen when you do this way.